Many of you had good food this afternoon. Only so many, most of you are starving. It's a fundamental question of human rights. I think you want to have lunch outside? I think they are all keen for intellectual appetite then, and I think climate has made them very conscious not to eat much food so they don't cut trees. Anyway, so good afternoon everybody. Please pay a little attention. If you want to sleep, keep your eyes open and sleep like Napoleon. Okay, you can see we have a stellar panel here and I welcome each one of you. Okay, our subject for the discussion this afternoon is building resilient climate innovation ecosystem. I think the word innovation is most important at this point in time because what are Trump buy? Some of you know about Trump buy? How many of you know? Okay, Trump buy has some different comments on climate and therefore we all have to be very innovative how to wade our way through in the thing that we are really so much committed to. So I think that is what should be one of the focus of our discussion. How do we wade our way through? Because when difficult times are there, headwinds are different, we do not know what exactly is happening. I think some of you in particular, I think Sandeep, you live in US and you've been working around, so you've got some thoughts and other people also would have ideas as to how do we go about gearing this whole ecosystem. And if I may just do one thing, if I may ask each one of you to tell a little bit about your background, that will be the first round, and then we'll go into other questions because audience needs to know where are you coming from. So each one will understand your perspective. So while we don't want to spend too much time on introduction, but introduction is very important for everyone to know that. So may I start with you?
Hi, good afternoon everyone. Vivek this side. I have led all the climate tech investments for Stride and currently building a climate tech focused platform which is Stride Green.
Hi folks, my name is Sandeep Hammer. I'm the managing partner of Green Frontier Capital. We're an early stage climate innovation focused fund with offices in Mumbai, Delhi and New York. I'm based in New York. I'm also on the board of New Lab, which is the largest climate accelerator in North America. So a lot of what I'm actually going to be speaking about today to add value in this discussion is going to be about how the US is doing things correctly in the early stage climate ecosystem to impact innovation in a positive way, the lessons of that and how India can learn from that. So.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ruchira Shukla, and I run a climate tech focused fund called Synapses, which is focused on STEM-led innovations for climate and health. I was previously building IFC's disruptive tech investing business for South Asia, doing direct equity investments and VC fund investments in the technology space. So I'll be bringing both those perspectives to the discussion today.
Hi. I'm Rama Subramaniam from Anchor Capital. We are an early stage deep science and tech fund. While we are sector agnostic, we have a large focus in climate. Climate is one of the, more than majority of our investments are in that space. More about it as we speak earlier.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Raj Pai. So GEF, so we started as Global Environment Fund, a dedicated climate impact investor for the last 20 years in few markets, US, Latin America, Africa, and India. I manage the India operations, and we are more of a growth equity, growth stage investor, primarily into the full spectrum of climate sectors. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Nipun Sani. I've spent last 2 decades in the fund industry with Merrill Lynch and Apollo. After running Apollo for about 10 years in India, stepped out and as an advisor with Apollo and set up my own platform. Climate is close to my heart. We have a Climate Angel platform based out of Delhi with about 350 angel investors working on pre-seed investments in the climate space.
So thank you very much. Can I ask you one question? What you think is climate for climate at this point in time? What I mean to say is, what is the climate around the world and how you think, a little quick reaction as to, is it depressive at this point in time? Is it something else? So that would be wonderful to hear, because what your perspective on the whole atmosphere, on the conversation on climate, and we worked a lot on COP28 and 29 and all that thing. So how do you see the climate evolving? So Nipun, you have to leave. He has to leave, you know, maybe at 4:30, but we'll hold him up for a while.
Yeah, I think if it's perspective, I think there's a lot of talk. I don't know how many conferences in a year happen on climate change as a topic, but I think if you see the bottom line of the whole thing, which I've read, is like all the targets which are there, we've only reduced, we've not even reduced, I think we've moved the needle on fossil fuel by just 2 percentage points. Like if the total fossil fuel used was 100 units, it's still growing, but it's like we've just moved by 2 points, and I think so there's a lot of talk, but I think just lot more need to get done around the world, including India, US, you know, wherever you talk, the problem is so big that I think just the conversion of words to action, there's a big gap. I'll let the other panelists share their thoughts.
Yeah, Raj.
So yeah, no, climate for climate. I think it's really very contextual. I'll just give you, so we are also very active in other markets like US, where things are kind of regressing to some point, but I think you have to see the drivers for climate. I'll speak more from an India perspective. I think climate sometimes gets confused as a feel-good sector, but I think there are two drivers for it. One is the environmental, which most of us can relate to. You know, India is pollution and, you know, the net zero goals, all of that make it a very attractive sector. But I think what often gets lost, you know, India is in a very different stage of evolution on this sector than other countries like US or other, because of the other factor is the geopolitics. I think we can't ignore that. If you see today, the single largest risk India faces is the energy security, which is also part of the national security, right? So we look at climate as not just a fad. It's, if you look at the core sectors, renewables, where is the dependency? 95% of the supply chain is with one country, right? Wafers in China, solar wafers. If you look at electric vehicles, that's one of the fast growing sectors most of us have invested. The dependency, again, India produces less than 1% of the rare earths that go into making the batteries, magnets, what have you. So I think climate has to be seen, in my opinion, in two ways. One, purely from an environmental perspective, which is the easier part. But if you look at it from the geopolitics, India has no choice, and I think is one of the best positioned country, both from a demand and from a need perspective to invest in this.
I hear what you said, Nipun, but in addition to that, you know, the climate change is it's not just about the greenhouse gases, right? I mean, it's about the fact that there's going to be food security issues as climate change impacts. And irrespective of what happens, we have to ensure that we have enough food security across the globe is one. Similarly is the fact that manufacturing is moving towards biomanufacturing. And that's where I think there is a lot of scope for science-based innovations to come in to increase, whether it's increasing productivity, whether it is bringing more climate resilient food, or whether it is how do you help manufacturing transition to a more sustainable manufacturing environment. I think that's where there's a lot of potential. Yes, there is greenwashing that happens, but at the same time, there are a lot of these innovations happening, and I think that's what is the opportunity I would see as.
Yeah, and I would build on that. So climate is a whole lot of things. Climate is not a single sector. It is the energy transition, it is energy efficiency, it's the agri-tech solutions, it's circular economy solutions, and a lot of adaptation is required along with the mitigation pieces that everyone focuses on. And I think it's a huge opportunity for India to solve not just for itself, but for the world. And the world is looking, because of the geopolitics and the way it's playing out, for self-reliance on solutions that can enable local manufacturing for the energy transition, but also for other industries to become more resilient and less dependent on global supply chains. And climate cuts across all of that. So yes, there is a strong evangelizing that's needed, and that's happening through such events. But there is the availability of enabling policy regulation. There is a lot of capital being spent, and you saw the budget announcements. There's a lot that was put out for climate, and we are seeing a very mature innovation ecosystem where profitable, sustainable business models are being created for climate.
Thank you.
So I'm going to, for anyone who doesn't know enough about climate, because I'm assuming that there are some people here that don't follow climate, greenhouse gas emissions are directly correlated to growth and industrialization of an economy. And India currently is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. It's about 50 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. India accounts for about 4 to 5%. If you look at India's GDP size right now, it's about 4 trillion. And even if you assume a 6% growth rate in GDP for the next 2 decades, India will be a $16 trillion economy. So a 4x growth in GDP. And there is no other large economy that is growing as fast as India is. Resultantly, it can be therefore concluded that India will also have the largest greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, there's a big opportunity from a decarbonization perspective in India. However, the climate for climate, as you asked, is also a function of capital availability, and capital availability in this sector is usually focused on return generation capability. The good news is that in India, a lot of these early stage climate companies have unit economics that make sense. So I'm going to just give you one quick example. Does it really matter what the world thinks about climate change when the cost to operate an electrical three-wheeler in Delhi is 50 paisa per kilometer versus the cost of operating an non-electrical or an internal combustion engine three-wheeler, which is 5 rupees per kilometer? There's a almost a 95-96% cost savings, on operating, about 90% savings. So if you believe that India has to industrialize and grow, these technologies that you're seeing in climate are highly disruptive and hugely money-making. So if you actually ignore climate because you believe that there's a negative climate environment supporting that view, then you're going to miss out on some of the largest money-making opportunities in India, is what I feel.
So climate in South, the global South is positive to the point that you mentioned regarding changes which are happening in US. But still, what we see in India specifically is that all the three components for which can foster climate, positivity, is a good technology innovation which is happening across the sectors. That is being supported by the policies that are coming in from the policy makers, and innovative financing is available, both from a blended financing is available. So from that perspective, the climate ecosystem in India is thriving right now in terms of the various components across. While we have missed our target of 1.5 degree, restricting the Earth's temperature at that, we have missed that, but still there are a lot of innovations which are happening both towards the greenhouse gases reduction emission, as well as towards the other parts of climate. So there is some positivity which is available, but we all need to push it together.
Yeah. Wonderful. Can I have that one slide I had presented here? Can put it on the screen? Somebody can do that? Okay, well, they do that. I divided the whole subject into 4 or 5 questions so we can all have more directional discussion. But in the meanwhile, what I'm trying to understand is this, that with US taking different position, does really Trump mean what he is saying, or he is a rhetoric? Even if he does something, how is it going to impact Europe and perhaps India, in terms of financing, in terms of, investors from the US, how do they review it? Any perception? Maybe I know that nobody can say exactly what's going to happen, but at least, as you all say, the future may be uncertain, but it's not unthinkable. So if you can put a thinking cap and have some reaction as to how it is going to unfold. What are perceptions that you are in the industry leaders, feel about?
So just give a couple of...
Great, Raj. Please go ahead.
Just a couple of points. I think yes and no. I think people think India is decoupled because it's the large economy, 1.4 billion people. But if you see, honestly, you don't have to look back more than maybe last 2 weeks. It's been severely affected, right? Because what US is doing does affect, and that's a weakness that India has. So if you see in the last 2 weeks, somebody mentioned $12 billion of foreign capital has actually been sucked out of the capital markets. I mean, you can I've stopped looking at the markets. I mean, it's just really been a very bad scenario. The currency is at the lowest point, 88. It's never been that bad. So I think that's a huge weakness India has for the wrong reasons. Why I say that is, India is largely a domestically driven economy. Ideally, there should not have been this level of impact, but there is. What that means is, there's a domestic capital pool is not coming in as strongly as it should. I'm not talking retail, I'm talking more institutional. So I think that's a big opportunity and a gap India has, that despite all this third largest economy, we are still somewhat very, very strongly coupled with the global, and that's where the Trump rhetoric can affect emerging markets so strongly. That's not a good thing.
Mr. Bhai, I'd like to point out here,
please.
I have actually had the exact opposite experience. That I've actually had more people reach out to me and say, I want to put more money into India right now because Trump is saying that he's not favoring climate. There's, climate as a subject matter is something that is still a very, very sort of an area where people want and see the opportunity to make significant returns. And India wants to own green. Our recent budget was totally focused on green. People recognize the opportunity for green. And when Trump said, I don't want to support climate anymore, and he's basically withdrawing, I've had more people reach out to me, more of my LPs reach out to me, I want to double up, I want to double down on my capital, because it's a passionate subject. People really don't care about the fact that Trump, so my experience has been absolutely different.
I would just say that the one thing going for climate is the fact that, and I say often that that's the strongest tailwind, is the crisis itself, right? Rhetoric notwithstanding, you can't ignore that the world is coming to an end if we don't do anything about it today. We're on a Titanic that's about to hit the iceberg. So how long can you close your eyes to the eventuality? One has to act. So there is this sense of urgency which is bringing policy support and capital. I must also admit that the capital that's coming in, we're right now just scratching the surface. India needs 10 trillion to meet its net zero targets. In energy transition alone, you need about 260 billion per year. And we are at maybe less than 1.5 billion a year. So the need is pressing, and I think the writing's on the wall. So notwithstanding what announcements are being made, people will soon realize that this is the inevitable and action is needed and needed urgently.
And some of these areas that are there is not only related to what Trump might say, right? And there's something on the public market side that you spoke of. But there's a whole lot of other areas. So, and I would still go back to the transitions that are happening in manufacturing, the transitions that are happening towards food security, the whole space around the whole battery, chemistries, those are R&D that's happening in India. And these are all problem statements that you are addressing for not just India, but for a large part of the globe. If you're talking of, for example, climate resilient seeds, which is important if you need to get to food security. Now, that's a company that will get capital from large parts of the world. It has got nothing to do with just US money. So I think we need to look at the fact, we have to see how we could leverage capital from other parts of the world, because this is addressing issues across the globe, which affects everybody as well. So I think that while there is a headline news that happens, then there is also some capital market movements that will happen. We are talking of long-term patient capital in private markets, where some of these innovations are going to take 5 years, 8 years, 10 years for these to reach global scale. And by that time, Trump and God knows who else would have come and gone. And there's different amounts of capital that will be required in that journey. So I think we shouldn't get carried away by these headline political moments, because there is at the bottom line, there is business, and people see this opportunity. There cannot be anything more than the fact that if you don't have food, transport to happen, I mean, everybody recognizes that. And anyone who's a good dandawala knows that if I invest today, I will, it's for a long time, right? So I think we should look at the longer term. And I think that's where the opportunity lies for innovations from India.
Yeah. Vivek, you have any perspective?
So while US has gone back on the Paris climate agreement, and we have seen those kind of things coming now, but from a global investor perspective, as well as for the Indian founders and Indian innovation ecosystem, we are seeing a lot of AI innovation happening in food security. We are seeing a lot of critical minerals being, those setups are now coming up in India. So, and this is something which is required by the globe. While if we in India are understanding that that is good for the Indian investors and that is good for the global investor, for the Indian ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, it is a good news that all that capital is now coming to India. So I see this a big opportunity for us to double down on investments like Sandeep mentioned.
Yeah. Anything else? Anyone? Nipun?
No, I think America is following a policy of America first. He's clearly stated it. I think you are going to see economic wars. You will not see military wars, but it's the beginning of economic wars, is my view. Europe is going to be at loggerheads with America. America is going to be he's a bully. He's going to bully everybody to come to the table. And I think as far as India is concerned, India has to be India first. And I think we are importing capital. We don't have capital to finance our growth, whether it's climate growth, any other growth. I think, and the risk is that this capital is going to shrink. It's going to go back. And what the amount of capital that we need and the amount of capital that is coming, I don't think it's even 1 to 5% of what we need. I think there's just that India, like we think we want to be energy independent. You have to be capital independent. It's a long journey. And we are lacking that sorely. And this is not helping. This is not going to help. India has already started reducing tariffs in anticipation that is doing it. So, and you do that on the energy side, almost we are import dependent on China for everything. We can't even make our own batteries. We are at least 10 years behind. So, and it's not like people don't know what to do. I think people know what to do, but everything needs capital. And I think 80% of capital is going between renewables and electric vehicles or EVs. Like these are the two fields which are taking away a lot of the, whatever is the capital formation. But I think all the other fields, we just need a lot more managers, a lot more global capital, domestic capital. Ultimately, I think the regulators need to figure out, like you were able to do it for the VC ecosystem in some way. I think climate has not got its attention on its own. It's getting just clubbed with all the other investment pools. So let's see if we can put India first, energy first, and then have a think tank. Just think about, like, the numbers are really big. Trump announced a $500 billion budget for AI, okay, first week, and then another $1 trillion coming. So we are thinking in terms of 5 billion in the budget, like it's nothing. It's like a rounding off error. I think we are thinking too small. So that's the implication, that if we want to be independent, I think we have to think bigger, think faster, and I think go beyond thinking to execution. I think too much. Everybody's just talking.
Yashubhai, can I just add one point,
Please.
if you don't mind?
Yeah.
It's very important to identify when you say capital is not coming in, what stage of a company's life cycle is capital not coming in. Our capital markets, as you know, my background is in secondary markets initially in my first part of my life. There's enough of developed capital available, in the public markets. There's enough access to capital in the public markets. In any case, India was not dependent on early stage innovation capital. We have enough of it here. It's the issue of basically getting growth stage capital which is the problem. So, when you talk about, there's no capital available right now in India, it's the growth stage capital that's not available. Scale capital is not available. But innovation capital is available. And late stage capital is available.
No, I'm sorry. I was interacting. There are questions here on the topics. But wonderful. One thing I feel we all need to do is to have better communication in light of what is happening in the US, so that investors are addressed properly. Because there are 2, 3, 4 types of investors I see. one who is sophisticated and understands the climate issues. There are investors who are sophisticated but do not fully understand. Okay. Third class is there are investors who want to invest for the sake of investment, large community of that, and they get little confused as to should we invest in this or should we not. As soon as the word climate comes, then you begin to think what would happen to my return in light of new things. So I believe that if there is some way to communicate to people that this space continues to be as robust as ever, and particularly if all of you can, at least right in this audience, talk about 1 or 2 or 3 instances or some investment that you made, how productive that has been, because those storytelling will be the most effective way of, I believe, creating, resilience, if I may put it that way, because people are asking questions as to is it worth going into this, what's going to happen, In fact, there are a lot of opportunity that will also be created out of the new syndrome in terms of innovations and other things. But if there are any thoughts on that, how do we communicate to the investor community which is not so sophisticated and which is sitting on a large pool of capital to invest?
If I may jump in there, I think you're right. And a lot of the investors are still bearing the scars of Clean Tech 1.0, where a lot of business models failed, a lot of money was lost, right? And so there is still that association of climate tech with impact, but not financial returns. And I think a big part of the storytelling will be, as you rightly said, examples. And the more we can demonstrate that the business models we are backing today in the climate tech realm have strong IP moats, have strong business design moats, which allow them to grow profitably and get to EBITDA positive way faster than some of the other sectors that have seen VC money in even the last 2 decades of India's journey. And that EBITDA profitability is allowing for other forms of capital, including debt, to be put in earlier than would otherwise have been possible. And so you have a more blended, balanced capital stack, and that gives better returns on equity. So we need to take those sort of demonstrations out, and that evangelizing is happening, more case examples are being put out, and it's shifting that paradigm to think of climate as delivering outsized financial returns. And all of us have such case examples.
If I can just add one point to that, I think if there's one thing we have seen in the last 15 years of being here is capital never follows need or desire. It has to, and I think you said the right word, story. I think one takeaway is the story has to be economics. There is no better story to sell to an investor than the economics. Need, desire, honestly doesn't matter. So I can give 2 examples. Like the renewable sector has taken off in India, not because the government has a goal of 500 gigawatts. It's taken off because it's a far cheaper, better alternative than the conventional. That's a story that's worth selling to any investor. The second thing I see is, I think the last panel talked a lot on ESG, on the policies actually. I'm not a big fan of policies, but policies played right build the right story. So now there are policies coming globally where if you are not reporting on carbon, your tax goes up. I'm not talking the tariff, I'm talking the CBAM and the tax coming. Starting 2 years from now, every Indian company exporting to Europe will be subject to carbon tax. And I can give you one example. That single threat we have seen India's largest cement companies, steel companies, changing their behavior not because they are believing in the new mission or anything. They are changing because their economics are going to be affected. That's my 2 cents on it.
Any other thought, any other example that you might want to give?
I also see is the fact that a lot of companies from India now, see, the other thing is that in addition to what the money that you rightly said, both of you said, is that if it's only India only thing, then there is always a hesitancy. So the fact that you see that and if you just say it as an alternate to China +1 and all, there is an opportunity, but it's seen as a very short-term opportunity. The fact that there are a lot of other solutions that are coming from India, which is for more global in nature, and that it has a much, much larger opportunity, I think that is what is changing the story. So the storyline which is saying that abhi thoda paisa bana sakte hain kyunki there is this opportunity will not attract the large capital. I think what is important is to talk of the larger opportunity, the fact that we do the global thing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Vijay, for us, the metric for whether an opportunity is working or not.
Can we have some bells ringing outside? Is fire alarm or puja? You don't know these days. Okay. Noise is a part of climate anyway.
Two things. One, nothing basically gets investor attention more than exits. So, one of the things that we've been very disciplined about is taking an exit when you get it, even if it means that you've not realized the full potential on the investment. And what that allows us to do is to then sit on opportunities that are science driven and which are binary outcomes. So if you have 10 companies in your portfolio and 5 or 6 of them are heavily climate science focused, and a couple of them are climate tech companies but are not necessarily science focused but can scale very quickly, when that scale is happening and the growth capital investor basically shows up, rather than doubling down on the investment, we exit on the investment. And then what that does is basically we de-risk capital of investors, and then we sit through the ones that actually have binary return opportunities. So that's one way we do it. The second thing is the opportunity capable of driving catalytic capital? And that's something that we monitor very, very closely. There's no point in investing in a huge climate science opportunity if no one else believes in that science. So we look at companies very, very closely. We monitor their ability to raise capital at every stage of their growth and science validation. And if we feel that people are not necessarily buying into the science, we sort of stop scaling that investment opportunity, and that's how we control our risk. So that's what we do.
Yeah. We are left with about 3.5 minutes, but just wanted some idea about what kind of 1 or 2 policy changes that we can think of in India, and maybe in terms of relationship with the countries who can help us. Okay, like Europe is very high still on climate. They are suffering also from the climate issues. Okay, so how do we attract European capital? But more importantly, I would just say that 1 or 2 policy changes. One change I would think, we should allow our not-for-profit to invest in venture capital funds. So that will ease up a lot of capital, and of course pension plan is the second. Okay, so without government undertaking too much of burden, they can still promote, but we should direct that to the climate. So it is purpose-based investment that can be directed. Maybe IFC can play a lot of role in communication and all this kind of situation. You are more powerful than anybody else here in the room. So you have something to say?
Yes, no. DFIs, including IFC, have had climate as one of their key focus areas for over a decade now. And I would say there's a lot of DFI capital that's already flown into the Indian VC ecosystem, a lot of which is going to climate. A lot of it has gone into infrastructure funds and large-scale renewable projects. So that remains a very viable and big pool of capital that all VC funds tap into. India's own FOFs, domestic FOFs, are a strong pool. And I agree with you that the piece that can be a big multiplier would be corporate participation. Not just from corporate balance sheets, but I also think the CSR pool, which now at this point is sent to various, non-profit and foundational philanthropic causes, could be directed well to the VC ecosystem, where it would have a multiplier effect, because it would be used to generate these big pools of companies that would grow to become large winners globally. So I think opening up that CSR pool and with greater corporate participation would definitely be required.
I would say actually more than the CSR money, because the moment you get CSR, there's always different perspectives to it. I'm not saying, I won't say no to CSR money. I won't say, but, yeah, but I think that we need to have more incentives for private sector money to come into R&D. So we have to move our R&D budgets to 3% of our GDP. And to incentivize that, whether it's a government funding or whether it's private sector to invest into that, is very, very important. Part of that would have to come into the VC sector, but part of it would also have to go into the growth, because, for example, we are early stage, deep R&D, science-based investments. But for most of our companies, as they set up the first factory, if they look at it, they have got capital not from India, but they have got capital from Australia, from France, and other countries. And I think that incentive has to come for private sector capital to come into the...
Just double down on what Rima said. I think I agree that R&D is one of the lowest hanging fruit that I think India needs to, whatever policies to spur that is good. And I'll make slightly a controversial statement in terms of countries is, see, there's no boundaries in terms of where innovation comes from. You know, China today is spending 250% more than the global R&D spend. And last interesting comment I'll say, we have invested in multiple EV companies. China plus one you have heard, right? This new theme called One in China have actually created R&D centers, Indian companies in China, because they found that part of the world to have the best technology in some of the clean tech. So I think India can use help from any and all countries. I would not put geopolitics in the way.
So I think it shows time up. We started 45 minutes late, but 15 minutes are early, the cutting of our time. On a very important subject like climate, you cutting out time is not a great idea. But I don't know who is responsible for allowing us. We'll take our own time, 5 more minutes, not to...
So Nishit bhai, on this point, I'd just say that New York City, I'm going to share the example of New York City, which is where I live. There's an organization called the New York City Development Corporation. Now, if you look at the state of Maharashtra, the Bombay Municipal Corporation has a 16,000 crore budget. And climate is essentially a local social subject, okay? Karnataka has Bangalore has a problem of water. Mumbai has a problem of waste disposal. During monsoons, sewage basically starts coming up the gutters. Delhi has an air quality problem. Some other city has another problem. What you need to do is basically have these local innovation hubs that tie up with private sector players. So for example, in Delhi, I know that the Hero Group, who we talked to recently, is open to the idea of working with the local government to set up an innovation hub to solve AQI issues by essentially incubating early stage companies that only work towards solving AQI issues. What do they do in the process? They create these companies which don't have funding issues, and you can do the same thing. So basically setting up local climate innovation hubs are actually very pivotal, and that's the way US has actually done that very, very successfully. Multiple climate problems have been solved in New York City because of New Lab partnering with the New York City Development Corporation and getting private funding as part of their CSR initiatives and incubating startups to solve their local problems. So we need to do that in India. You can't have one hub basically going around funding every situation. What you do is you have local innovation hubs looking at solving local issues and incubating companies in that local area to focus on those specific issues. Yeah. That's what.
So I think, yeah, you want to, we
just
can
to
quickly.
Add to, so essentially, the public-private partnership, that is something that we have seen working. And a good example would be the dissemination of FAME subsidies. So similar structures we have, there are multiple structures that can be created jointly. We are working with a very large corporate right now. One of our portfolio companies essentially is enabling the electric vehicle movement of trucks at the same price as diesel or lower than that. So to the point that it has to, unit economics is first thing that from an investor perspective, it works, but at the same time, innovative solutions are available, which can lead to both policy matters as well as to the climate.
So if you don't mind, we are running out of time. So I may make 3 suggestions. Number 1, can we do some case studies as how rewarding climate investment has been? That would be one thing, some kind of, and we can say overall how it has worked, how can it do better, some study would be helpful. Secondly, I have pointed out different items here, role of law and governance. I'm sorry for that. So let us take each item and have separate session for discussing what innovations we can do, what can we do about this. Same way leveraging technology. what can we do about blockchain, IoT, climate risk assessment, etc. And other kind of high cost, how do we reduce the cost structure for climate in particular, or regulatory barriers and whatever it is. So this should be one of the exercises that we can perhaps do. Number 3, maybe we should, in a lighter vein, we should move capital of India from Delhi to some other location, just like we used to do Delhi to Shimla, remember, but during British time. So whole government would move somewhere else. How many of you agree on that? Government must move from Delhi, no? Raise your hand. Only so many. I expect more. Raise more hands, please. Okay. Okay. Now I think we have to move government, because today in a polluted environment, as it is polluted, and we are adding more pollution by every time flying up to Delhi. So they must move somewhere else, which is more eco-friendly, and I would suggest that Bombay could be one of them. Okay. So I think, but we really need to also move some geographical centers, on the areas where pollution is highly generated. And we have to be flexible, do more and more. We can have e-parliament, we can have a number of other ideas, but today I see that there is no end to this pollution in Delhi. And if we can do something, that would be wonderful, but this was on a lighter vein. You can take it seriously, and I think this is the time up, and really time up. So, but time up to move upwards, go to the next level, have more discussion on the topics that I have suggested or read up. We'll have separate sessions some point in time. IVCA hopefully will give us a little more time. They'll be generous. We all have contributed to this event. We'll contribute to other ones as well, but we must have more dedicated discussion on how do we be resilient, innovative as far as this climate situation is concerned. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Really appreciate. Welcome, and thanks panel. I think all of you have been brilliant brains around, and let's do something together. Thank you.